A true story, you must listen to it from beginning to end, because this story might change your life. The snow fell quietly over the small mountain town of Ash Pine, nestled deep in the Oregon wilderness. Most of the town's residents had long since moved away, driven out by the harsh winters, dwindling jobs, and silence that blanketed the forest like a second layer of snow. Only a handful remained, those who didn't mind the cold or the quiet. Eli Turner was one of them. Eli was a man of few words and fewer friends. He lived in a log cabin he built himself, deep in the woods far from the main road. In the town, people referred to him as the ghost of the mountains. A man who chopped wood like the trees had wronged him. Who came down into town only for salt, flour, and fuel. Who never smiled. But they didn't know the real Eli. They didn't know that 12 years ago, Eli had been a different man, full of life, full of love. A husband to a kind schoolteacher named Sarah, a father-to-be who built a wooden cradle by hand while humming lullabies under his breath. He had plans. Dreams. A future. Until the night it all vanished. Sarah had gone into labor during a blizzard. The snow had fallen too fast, too thick. By the time Eli reached the clinic with his unconscious wife in his arms, it was too late. The doctor whispered words Eli could never forget, "We couldn't save them." After that, something in Eli died. He returned to the cabin and didn't speak to anyone again. The cradle stayed in the attic, untouched. The forest became his only companion. And the silence, once unbearable, became a shield. Until one morning in late December, when a knock echoed through the door. It was faint. Hesitant. As though the one knocking wasn't sure if they should. Eli, axe still in hand, opened the door cautiously. And what he saw rooted him to the spot. A girl, young, maybe 18. Stood on his doorstep, trembling violently. Her clothes were torn, shoes soaked through, and her hands clutched her belly, round, heavy with life. "Please. I don't have anywhere else to go," she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. Her name was Hannah. Eli didn't speak. He stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. Something about her eyes, a mixture of desperation and defiance, reminded him of Sarah. Or maybe of himself. He lit the fireplace and wrapped her in a wool blanket. She sat without speaking, staring into the flames as if they held all the answers. Hours later, after hot tea and some warm broth, Hannah began to talk. Her story unraveled like threads from a frayed sweater. She had grown up with her older brother after their parents died in a car crash. He had fallen into drugs, gambling, and eventually debt. When Hannah became pregnant, her brother saw her not as a sister, but as a commodity. He traded her to a truck driver to settle a debt. An arrangement that turned violent when she resisted. She escaped in the middle of the night, walking barefoot through the snow with only one goal, to get far, far away. The lights from Eli's cabin had been a miracle. Eli didn't say much. He gave her a bed, food, and space. But something inside him stirred. It was the first time in years he had felt anything other than numb. Over the next few weeks, Hannah recovered. She moved slowly, always holding her belly with both hands like a shield. Eli watched her from a distance, fixing the roof, chopping wood, keeping the generator running. But one evening, as snow fell in heavy sheets outside, he took out the old cradle from the attic. He dusted it off, carved a fresh layer of polish into the wood, and added a new engraving, a small tree with 3 roots, representing the past, the present, and what could still be. When he presented it to Hannah, she cried for the first time in front of him. "I never had a father," she said softly. "But I think, this is what it must feel like. To be protected. To be safe." Eli didn't know what to say. But that night, he didn't sleep in silence. He sat beside her and told her everything, about Sarah, about the baby, about the cradle that was never used. It was the first time he spoke of them out loud. And it broke something open inside him. Weeks passed. And then came the night. The birth. Eli was terrified. But calm. He boiled water, wrapped towels, lit extra lamps. Hannah screamed and sobbed, and Eli held her hand as tightly as she gripped his. When the baby was born, a girl with dark hair and piercing eyes, Eli felt a wave of emotion he hadn't known he could still feel. They named her Hope. Life changed after that. The cabin, once silent, was filled with cries, coos, and lullabies. Hannah sang to Hope in the mornings, and Eli made fresh bread. They began reading books by the fire, telling stories, and even laughing. Eli taught Hannah how to chop wood and start a fire, and she showed him how to bake cookies and braid hair. Hope became the heartbeat of their little home, a symbol of second chances. Then came the visit from the social worker. She had tracked Hannah down through a missing persons report. She offered help, a safe apartment in Portland, job training, therapy. A new start. Eli expected Hannah to accept immediately. But she hesitated. "I don't want to leave you," she said, holding Hope close. "You're the only real family I've ever known." Eli looked at the baby, then at Hannah. "But you have to," he said gently. "For her. And for yourself. I'll always be here. But now you get to live." The goodbye was harder than he expected. The cabin felt emptier than ever. He placed Hope's drawings on the fridge. Folded her baby clothes with trembling hands. Months passed. Then one spring morning, as flowers began to bloom across the forest floor, there was a knock at the door. Eli opened it to find Hannah, smiling through tears, Hope bouncing in her arms. "We came back," she said. "Not because we had nowhere to go. But because you're our home." Behind her stood a small truck with their bags. They didn't ask. They simply stepped inside. And Eli, for the first time in years, wept. They planted a garden that spring. Built a second room onto the cabin. And when Hope took her first steps, she walked straight into Eli's arms. The lonely lumberjack who once believed his life had ended now had something greater than he could have imagined. He didn't just find a family. He found healing. Because sometimes, the most broken hearts give birth to the strongest bonds. And sometimes, the people who arrive unexpectedly are the very ones who bring us back to life. This story teaches us that life never truly ends, it simply takes a new direction. Eli was a man who had lost everything, his wife, his child, his happiness, and even the will to live. He isolated himself from the world, finding comfort only in silence. But fate gave him another chance, in the form of a stranger, a young girl who came seeking help, yet became the very healing Eli needed. The lessons are: never judge someone by their past, because the heart that has been broken the most often holds the greatest capacity to love. And true relationships aren't always built by blood, but by compassion and sacrifice. No matter how heavy the snow falls in life, if hope still lives in your heart, even the coldest winter can turn into spring.